The Catholic Church has had some brilliant ideas throughout the ages. One of my personal favorites is when they convince people that by paying them money they can live forever in paradise. I mean, that's just genius. Another one of their inspired ideas is their list of 7 deadly sins, namely lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, envy, and pride. By helpfully packaging all of man's vices into convenient little bite sizes, we all have a better shot at heaven. Now at this point, filthy heretics might point out that there sometimes appears to be a certain dissonance between what the Roman Catholic Church preached and what they practiced throughout history. But you'll notice hypocrisy isn't one of the deadly sins, so they're in the clear. Now, as a lover of history and Jesus, I want to help steer you away from these terrible sins in the only way I know. Therefore, I thought it'd be fun to look at 7 times in history when people weren't being very good Christians, and attribute each to one of the 7 deadly sins. Pope Alexander VI was a pretty swell dude. He was pope around the year 1500, but had been made a cardinal decades prior, and was therefore meant to adhere to clerical celibacy. But being the horn dog he was, Alexander couldn't help himself, and he had numerous acknowledged children with different mistresses. This caused his family name of Borgia to be synonymous with degeneracy in his time. One of these illegitimate children was Cesare Borgia, a former cardinal himself. According to the diary of a guy called Burchard, who was master of ceremonies at the time, Cesare once held a lavish feast in the papal palace and invited a lot of guests. Now if you think this was some solemn meal full of prayers and monks singing hymns, you've clearly never been to a Vatican insider party. Cesare needed to entertain his guests, and he had the ideal solution. Bring in the whores! Courtesans. 50 prostitutes streamed into the palace and started dancing with the guests. But that wasn't anywhere near wild enough for Cesare, so he had the courtesans take off their clothes and dance with the guests naked. Next up was the game for which history remembers the whole event, the Banquet of Chestnuts, in which chestnuts were scattered about the floor and the courtesans crawled around naked and picked them up. I'm not sure what the significance of chestnuts is in this context, but apparently Cesare and his father, Pope Alexander, had a blast watching it unfold. But a great night requires a great ending, and what a great ending it was, as prizes were announced for whichever guest could have sex with the most courtesans, and a massive orgy ensued. All this was done under the watchful eyes of the man upstairs. Just gonna make it rain a little here. Oops! Accidentally caused a massive flood. I hate it when that happens. Let me just fix this real quick. And Australia's on fire. Alright, time to check on my main man down in Rome. Crap, I think I may have just caused another bubonic plague. I should mention the possibility that Burchard was full of crap and this banquet didn't happen at all. The story's veracity is disputed, so you ought to take it with a grain of salt. I realize I've been pretty hard on the Catholics so far, which doesn't seem fair. I think it's time I found another target. As it happens, that's exactly what Alexander the Great said in 323 BC. He had spent his adulthood conquering lands and establishing himself as one of the greatest military leaders in history, and was planning an invasion of Arabia. But that had to wait, as while situated in Babylon, he embarked on a different battle altogether, the conquest of the banquet table. He spent his days drinking with his officers and developed a fever, dying within a fortnight. In fairness, there are other possible explanations for his death, such as disease or poison, but it seems that the great conqueror had developed a habit for heavy drinking over the years, which may well have spelled his doom. Let that be a lesson for all of us not to lose ourselves in overindulgence, lest it lead us to an early grave. Fun little aside, whilst Alexander's body was being moved back to his homeland of Macedonia, one of his officers, called Ptolemy, stole his sarcophagus and brought it with him to Egypt, where he established the Ptolemaic dynasty, the same dynasty that practiced generations of sibling inbreeding, culminating in Cleopatra, who fought with Mark Antony against Augustus, who, legend has it, broke off the nose of Alexander's body. But we're straying, of course. Time for... We now advance a couple of millennia in time to look at Panama in the 19th century. It was 1856 and the United States had recently completed the construction of a railroad in Panama, which dislocated several Panamanians and caused resentment against the Americans. One day, a train arrived in Panama City with some passengers who were leaving for California. But their ship couldn't leave yet, so some of the Americans wandered off to explore the area. This brings us to a man called John Oliver. He was out with some of his friends when some drama occurred at a fruit stand. It went something like this. Alright, let's go. Hey bro, aren't you gonna pay for that? No. Hey, what do you mean no? I don't feel like paying. That's what I said last night to your mama. What did you say, you little shit? Spanish curse words. Whoa, calm down, guys. Here, I'll pay for the darn slice. Jesus. Jesus, why you say my name? The bloody brawl that followed would be known as the Watermelon Riots, and it lasted all throughout the night with hundreds of people fighting in the streets. 2 locals were killed and 15 Americans. Dozens more were injured and lots of damage was done to the city, all because a guy who's probably not a time-traveling late-night show host didn't feel like paying for a slice of watermelon. I hope you learned your lesson, folks, because if you're ever caught shoplifting at Target and refuse to take the blame, you might just start a war or something. Speaking of which, this next story involves a bridge, World War II, and a bathroom break that led to the death of millions. But first, for a bit of background, the Japanese invaded Manchuria in 1931 and created their own puppet state there in the following year. Tensions were high between the Chinese and the Japanese, with thousands of Imperial Japanese soldiers situated in China, but they were still at peace, brittle as it was. Fast forward to the summer of 1937, and a private in the Japanese army called Shimura Kikujiru went missing from his post, not far from a bridge known as Marco Polo Bridge. It was supposedly to relieve a stomachache, though I find that a rather flimsy excuse. A real soldier would just shit on the ground. Anyways, the Japanese were concerned about this and asked the Chinese for permission to search the nearby town for a private Shimura. This was refused, however, and with tensions boiling over, the armies mobilized. As Shimura peacefully released his tongue, the battle at Marco Polo Bridge had begun. Yes, get him! Kill them! Rip off his face and eat it! Blood! Death! They filled me with such ecstasy that I wish that... What? Shimura? Hey, what the hell is going on here? Where the hell have you been? You vanished from your post. Have you any idea what you've done? Hey now, I had no idea you were going to start a war over me. I was on the toilet. I have owie in my tummy. Hey, is there any chance you could forget this whole misunderstanding? I'm sort of eyeing for a promotion one of these days. You'd be doing me a real solid. This wasn't just one battle. The Marco Polo Bridge incident was the start of the Second Sino-Japanese War that lasted for over 8 years and claimed millions of lives on both sides. Some have even suggested that it is a true start of World War II rather than the Nazi invasion of Poland 2 years later. Poor old Shimura. Imagine having all that on your conscience. Did you grow up with siblings? Because if you did, I'm sure they played the odd prank on you from time to time. Like toothpaste Oreos or pouring water on you as you slept. Of course, the worst you ever did in retaliation was beat them up or rat them out to your parents. You did never, like, pillage the countryside or anything, right? Enter Robert Curthose, eldest son of William the Conqueror, who famously conquered England in the 11th century. Robert was a bit of a... what's the word I'm looking for? Right, annoying low-life asshole who got on the nerves of a lot of people, none more than his own brothers. In 1077, his brothers thought it'd be funny to dump a chamber pot full of human excrements on Robert, which I admit is pretty funny, but it angered Robert greatly. I honestly can't blame him for that. But I can't blame him for revolting against his father when he didn't punish the brothers. Robert and his followers went to war with William, but when they failed to seize his castle of Rouen, they fled. But Robert wasn't done. He was so filled with rage that he ravaged the land and even injured his father in combat. The fighting eventually ceased, and Robert spent years as a wandering knight. But his little temper tantrum came back to bite him in his smelly rump. When William the Conqueror died and passed the kingdom of England to his brother William Rufus, even though Robert had seniority. Robert got to be Duke of Normandy though, which is a pretty sweet compromise, I guess, and he continued his whimsical escapades for a few more years. He even lived into his 80s, though the last 3 decades were all spent in prison, so they were kind of a bust. He never got to be King of England, however, and we can only wonder what might have happened if Robert Curthose had done literally anything else other than open rebellion because his brothers poured poop on his head. Envy is one of the uglier sins, in my opinion. Disdain for your neighbors because they've got a greener lawn than you, or hatred of anybody who has it better than you, spring to my mind. You probably think that nothing good ever comes from envy. Until recently, I thought so too. But I'm here to tell you you're wrong. Allow me to introduce Antoine Augustin Parmentier, a French pharmacist and agronomist from the 17 and 1800s, and a pretty cool dude by all accounts. Among his accomplishments was organizing the first mandatory smallpox vaccination campaign while working under Napoleon. He is best known for advocating for the consumption of potatoes, which was by no means a given in most of Europe in his time. You see, the French didn't much like potatoes and thought they were beneath them. Okay for smelly animals, but not fit for us mighty humans. It was even illegal to cultivate potatoes for a period of decades in the mid-18th century. And yes, these are the same people who eat snails, frogs, and sheep testicles, so forgive me if I'm a little suspicious of their culinary tastes. Anyway, Parmentier wasn't best pleased about the situation and sought to rectify it. He pulled all sorts of wacky stunts to breed the French people's acceptance of the trusty spud, like holding great potato feasts attended by the likes of Benjamin Franklin. His most memorable scheme is the reason he features here. Parmentier realized that few things are more powerful than man's lust for other people's stuff. So, according to legend, he surrounded his potato patch with armed guards all day so the people thought something valuable must be stored there. He then had the guards leave at night, and lo and behold, the dumb peasants stormed into the place and stole the potatoes. Parmentier had successfully weaponized people's envy and convinced them that literal pig feed was actually a delicacy. I mean, it worked so well that still to this day, billions of people around the world eat potatoes like nothing's more natural. But I'm not so easily fooled. I for one know that potatoes are simply a centuries-old psyop orchestrated by Big Pharma to feed us animal grub while they ride into the sunset with our freedoms in the back pocket, slurping down caviar even as we all die of heart failure at 50, and I will have none of it! Oh, would you look at that? Time to take my schizo medicine. Ah, pride, father of all sin. A fitting way to end. And we shall end this by looking at Roman Emperor Commodus, from the 2nd century after Christ, the son of philosopher-emperor Marcus Aurelius. Commodus grew up with all the privileges of being the emperor's son and heir. You could say Commodus was a rather prideful man. I mean, the guy has an entire section on his Wikipedia page entitled Megalomania, for crying out loud. For example, Commodus would strut about claiming to be a god, and he also fought as a gladiator, making sure he never lost, of course. But in 192, around the age of 30, Commodus took his antics to a whole new level. He had grown so full of himself that he didn't really like the names of things anymore. That is, names other than his own. So he decided that Rome shouldn't be called Rome anymore. To him, the name Colonia Luciania Commodiana sounded much better. And he didn't stop there. There was a whole bunch of stuff he wanted to rename too. Good morning, Your Excellency. The Senate has gathered today to discuss your proposed renaming of our city to Colonia Commodiana. You're also renaming the legions and the fleet after yourself, and you're renaming the months of the year after yourself. That's right. Oh, and don't forget, the people will now be called the Commodianus, and this day will henceforth be known as Dies Commodianus. Yes, it's just, you are aware that there are 12 months in the year? Or are they all to be named Commodus from now on? No, that would be crazy. Haven't you heard? I changed my name. I have 12 names now. My full name is Lucius Aelius Aurelius Commodus Augustus Herculeus Romanus Exuperatorius Amazonius Invictus Felix Pius. Your Mightiness, I'm afraid that we the members of the Roman Senate find these changes wholly unacceptable. What? Screw you! I'm the Emperor of the Commodian Empire. Has that no meaning to you? The Commodian Empire. I'll rename you too. Just watch me, bitch. The Senate will now be known as the Commodian Fortunate Senate. How do you like that, asshole? You're named after me, so I own you. I own everything. I'm an immortal god. You can't question me. You can't. Needless to say, the Roman aristocracy wasn't very impressed with Commodus, so it should come as no surprise that he was assassinated within a year of his renaming bonanza, being strangled in a game of naked wrestling as he was taking a bath. And that concludes this telling of 7 times in history man committed one of the 7 deadly sins, and I hope you enjoyed it, maybe even learned something. But if there are 2 things I want you to take away from this video, they are to stay away from the potatoes and to pay for your goddamn watermelons!